Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International.
And I'm CJ Hero. Welcome to our program tonight. And now for our headlines.
U.S. President-elect Joe Biden expresses frustration over Donald Trump's refusal to cooperate on the White House transition process, saying more people may die of coronavirus without immediate coordination on fighting the surging pandemic.
Thai police on Tuesday fired water cannon and tear gas on pro-democracy protesters attempting to get close to Parliament, where lawmakers were debating possible changes to the military scripted constitution.
And Hurricane Iota weakens to a Category 4 as it makes landfall in Honduras, threatening to deliver more drenching rains and fierce winds to areas devastated by a powerful storm just 2 weeks ago.
And finally, a SpaceX Crew Dragon carrying 4 astronauts docks with the International Space Station, the first of what the U.S. hopes will be many routine missions, ending reliance on Russian rockets.
The COVID-19 pandemic is generating despair and hope. Total infections around the world have soared over 55 million, with over 1.3 million deaths. But there's also progress in the effort to stop the virus. A new week and another new experimental vaccine show signs of real progress against the coronavirus. Drug maker Moderna said that early trials show its vaccine is nearly 95% effective. And the announcement comes after another leading candidate from Pfizer had similar results. Neither company has released the complete data behind their claims. Still, U.S. top diseases expert Anthony Fauci hailed the news.
Beyond expectation to have 2 vaccines now that are not close to 95% effective. We now have to convince people by our transparency and our openness and showing the data to get vaccinated, because by the time you get to April, end of April, May, June, we'll have the people who are, quote, in the general population. If we can vaccinate them over a period of the second quarter of 2021 and into the third quarter, as we approach the third and fourth quarter of 2021, I think we can get back to a considerable degree of normality. But we're there. We've got to get people to be vaccinated. And we can't abandon our public health measures during this transition period of going from some people getting vaccinated to a lot of people getting vaccinated to almost everybody getting vaccinated. Stop right. I think it's one of those things where you're going to say what the value of it is certainly overrides that inconvenience of that feeling poorly for a while.
Yet, with neither vaccine likely to be widely available for months, governments around the world are still moving forward with unpopular but life-saving restrictions on free movement, gatherings, and business. Globally, infections have soared past 54 million, with more than 1.3 million deaths. Infections in the U.S., the world's worst-hit nation, show no signs of slowing after 1 million new cases in less than a week pushed the total number past 11 million. The spikes have prompted new curbs, while experts warn families against large gatherings for the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday. A stay-at-home advisory was to come into force Monday in Chicago, while New York, the epicenter of the spring outbreak in the U.S., is also rushing to flatten a second curve. U.S. President-elect Joe Biden expressed frustration about President Trump's refusal so far to cooperate on the White House transition process.
Spoke about the need to access the outgoing administration's COVID vaccine distribution plans. What do you see as the biggest threat to your transition right now, given President Trump's unprecedented attempt to obstruct and delay a smooth transfer of power?
More people may die if we don't coordinate. If we have to wait until January 20th to start that planning, it puts us behind over a month, month and a half. And so it's important that it be done, that there be coordination now.
Dr. Fauci also said a smooth handoff is key to beating the pandemic.
Thousands of die-hard Donald Trump supporters rallied for a last stand Saturday in Washington, chanting 4 more years and blaming fraud for an election defeat that will force the president to vacate the White House after just 1 term. The Republican incumbent is sticking to claims of mass fraud and claiming he defeated President-elect Joe Biden in the November 3 vote, marking another unprecedented challenge to U.S. democratic norms as his time in office runs down. Watch this.
I'm here because I see a country that's divided, and I see a good versus evil, and this president needs us, the silent majority. We need to wake up. We need to take a stand for this country's values, the freedoms, the liberties, the pursuit of happiness. I don't see any hate on this side of the street. So with voter fraud, now I see on the media them discussing there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud. It takes 1 vote. If there's 1 vote that is fraudulent, that's enough for me. This isn't a research project. I'm not looking for statistically significant stuff. I'm looking for 1 evidence of voter fraud.
At the moment, I think they're still counting votes. And we hope Trump wins, but if he doesn't, the world will go on.
Can I have your name? President Trump, because I believe in him. He's done more for this country in 4 years than any president ever has. He's wonderful, and I love him. I came to stand up for him. To win, it's a fraud. It's been stolen.
Yes,
it's been stolen. It was rigged. I believe that with all my heart.
Yeah.
He will win, though.
Once the evidence comes out, it's going to turn around and go his way, because he's going to be president-elect 2020.
At least 10,000 people massed on the city's Freedom Plaza before marching towards the Supreme Court, brandishing flags. With the march underway, Trump tweeted that hundreds of thousands had turned out, while his spokeswoman, Kayleigh McEnany, made a claim that more than 1 million people were present. But the turnout was undoubtedly high for a strongly Democratic city, boosted by protesters from around the country, from Florida to Pennsylvania or Colorado. Trump said Friday that time will tell if he remains president in a momentary slip of his refusal to concede his election defeat.
Meanwhile, U.S. biotech firm Moderna announced its experimental vaccine against COVID-19 was almost 95% effective. Moderna's early results from a clinical trial with more than 30,000 participants marks a second major breakthrough in the quest to end the pandemic. Last week, American pharmaceutical company Pfizer and its German partner BioNTech their vaccine was 90% effective, said their vaccine was 90% effective. Both front runners are based on new technology that uses synthetic versions of molecules called messenger RNA to hack into human cells and effectively turn them into vaccine-making factories. The promising results of both vaccines are seen as a validation for mRNA technology, which has never before been brought to regulatory approval, but has the potential to transform the field. Here's Dr. Virginia Pitzer, an associate professor of epidemiology at the Yale School of Public Health.
I think it's very promising. I think coming on the heels of the Pfizer announcement last week, it wasn't entirely unexpected, given they are based on a very kind of similar technology. But it's always, I think, incredibly encouraging to see the results from the Pfizer vaccine backed up by the additional results from the Moderna vaccine trial. And ultimately, I think by seeing these early efficacy results, the hope is that the vaccine could be made available on an earlier basis based on these somewhat preliminary findings. The fact that it requires 2 vaccinations certainly is a challenge, and part of that is communicating to individuals that after they receive the first dose, that's not the end of it. They need to come back 3 to 4 weeks later, depending on the vaccine, to receive a second dose. I think there will also be logistical challenges in terms of keeping track of which vaccine individuals received.
Crucially, Moderna also announced that its vaccine can remain stable at standard refrigerator temperatures of 2 degrees Celsius to 8 degrees Celsius for 30 days. Now, Pfizer's vaccine, on the other hand, needs to be stored in deep freezer conditions of minus 70 degrees Celsius, which could complicate supply chain logistics, particularly in less developed countries. Take a look.
One of the challenges that was seen with the Pfizer vaccine was this requirement for minus 80 degrees Celsius storage, which only kind of certain research, mostly facilities, would have that type of storage for the vaccine available. Whereas with the Moderna vaccine, the cold chain requirements, or the requirements for keeping the vaccine at the proper temperature, are much more in line with the freezers that are available kind of in a typical healthcare setting. So in order to convince people to get the vaccine, I think, you know, it's important to demonstrate that these vaccines are not only effective, and the fact that it is very effective goes a long way to doing that, but also demonstrating that they're safe, which all of the signs up till now in the trials do suggest that they are also very safe to receive.
Philippine Ambassador to Russia, Carlos Soreta, said Russia could begin production of COVID-19 vaccines for the Philippines in January next year. The country should also prepare the cold storage required for such vaccines from Russia. He also mentioned that there is a Russian vaccine that does not require extreme temperatures, but it is a little more expensive. Watch this.
Our discussions, the Russian government, through its agency, has told us that they can make available their vaccines to us. So, of course, it's subject to our doing our own due diligence on it, but they can start producing for us, because they have to produce it as it's ordered. But as early as January, if we are ready to accept it. They also have nagpirmahan na po sila ng co-production agreement sa mga ilang bansa, tulad ng Korea, who could, after satisfying their domestic need, also supply. The Russian strategy is a little different from the Western pharmaceutical companies. They are allowing co-production. They have signed agreements or are negotiating agreements in almost every region of the world to be able to supply it to the widest demand possible. They know the demand is very high. So it's really a matter of how early we can do our own due diligence and then sign agreements, do the procurement process. And although there's a version of the vaccine that will not require extreme temperatures, but it might be a little more expensive. So there are some details that we're discussing together with our DOH and DOST, and also discussing on the business side, on the regulatory side, both in terms of supply and possible co-production.
Meanwhile, in another development, the Department of Health on Tuesday logged 186 new recovered cases, bringing the overall tally of coronavirus disease recoveries nationwide to 374,543. As of 4 p.m., the DOH also reported 1,148 new confirmed cases and 23 new deaths. The figure brings the total number of active cases to 28,303 and the death toll at 7,862. Of the active cases, about 83.6% are mild, 8.2% are asymptomatic, 2.9% are severe, and 0.22% are moderate, and 5.1% are in critical condition. Cavite topped the list of places with most number of newly confirmed cases at 88. It is followed by Quezon City with 52, Rizal with 46, Baguio City with 44, and the city of Manila also with 44 infections.
Eagle News, we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
This portion is brought to you by Canreeve Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Services offered: supply and installation of elevators, escalators, air conditioners, ventilators, jet towel hand dryers, generators, access control system, factory automation and modernization. For more info, please contact Ami Kanke at 0915-263-7198 or 0998-900-3224.
The South Luzon Expressway, a 36-kilometer long road that runs from Alabang to Santo Tomas, Batangas, connects several commercial and residential areas in the Greater Manila and the provinces of Laguna, Cavite, and Batangas. This will soon be extended all the way to the province of Quezon.
And we're still following the developments of the coronavirus situation in the United Kingdom. Joining us from London, here's Aribel Celestino. Hello, Aribel.
Hello, Alma, and yes, global hopes of overcoming the coronavirus pandemic were boosted Monday after a second vaccine was found to be nearly 95% effective in a trial, bringing much-needed optimism to a world facing surging infections and grueling new restrictions. The news from the U.S. biotech firm Moderna comes after similar results were announced last week for a vaccine candidate developed by pharma giant Pfizer and its German partner BioNTech. Major stock markets surged Monday in response, building on a boom sparked by Pfizer news 1 week ago. Moderna, whose results stem from a clinical trial of more than 30,000 participants, expects to be approximately 20 million doses ready to ship in the U.S. by the end of the year. Yet, with the widespread availability of any vaccine still a long way off, governments around the world are clamping down with unpopular but life-saving restrictions on free movement, gatherings, and business. Globally, infections have soared past 54 million with more than 1.3 million deaths. And experts caution there are still difficult and dangerous months ahead. A vaccine on its own will not end the pandemic, warned worldwide organization Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. Supply will initially be limited to healthcare workers and other vulnerable population, which could offer major help to hospital systems, but will still leave the virus with a lot of room to move, he said. Britain has been the worst hit nation in Europe, recording more than 50,000 coronavirus deaths from 1.2 million positive cases. But Johnson said the country now had to gigantic boxing gloves with which to wallop the virus with the shape of mass rapid turnaround testing and a potential vaccine that he said could be available for the most vulnerable citizens before Christmas. The government announced on Monday that daily testing capacity is set to more than double early next year, with the opening of 2 new mega labs processing up to 600,000 samples a day. Johnson is expected to deliver a keynote speech later this week on a green economic recovery from the pandemic, which will set out how the government plans to create thousands of jobs, he added. Back to you, Alma.
All right. Thank you very much. Aribel, for your report there in the United Kingdom. You stay safe, stay alert always, and we'll see you back sometime this week.
Thank you so much, Alma. Reporting from the United Kingdom, I'm Aribel Celestino, and we live in interesting times.
In other news, the World Health Organization Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus warns that countries who are letting the coronavirus run unchecked are playing with fire as global hopes of overcoming the pandemic were boosted Monday after a second candidate vaccine was found to be nearly 95% effective in an ongoing trial. He has warned that widespread availability of any vaccine remains a long way off, even as COVID-19 cases and deaths surge in many parts of the world. Watch this.
This is not the time for complacency. While we continue to receive encouraging news about COVID-19 vaccines and remain cautiously optimistic about the potential for new tools to start to arrive in the coming months, right now, we're extremely concerned by the surging cases we're seeing in some countries, particularly in Europe and the Americas. Health workers and health systems are being pushed to the breaking point. This is a dangerous virus which can attack every system in the body. Those countries that are letting the virus run unchecked are playing with fire.
And Mr. Steve.
And staying at the World Health Organization news conference today, one expert discussed how different parts of the world have tackled the pandemic. Dr. Michael Ryan, Executive Director of the WHO Health Emergencies Program, said countries who have had the highest success in controlling coronavirus have achieved it through a relentless focus on tracing, testing, and quarantine. Take a look.
Many countries have actually dealt with sometimes serious epidemics within their own countries and have found the comprehensive means by which to control the infection, test and trace contacts, quarantine contacts, treat their sick, and keep the virus, once they've had it low, keep the virus at a very low level. China is amongst those countries, but others like Korea, Singapore, Japan, New Zealand, now Australia and others. So this has been a fight that many countries have taken to the virus. I think what's common in their approaches, while the approaches have been very different and they're in very different cultural settings, what has been common in their approach is really a relentless focus on doing it all, a relentless focus on mobilizing community action, like in Thailand with community-based surveillance and response, a relentless focus on testing, tracing and quarantining. As you saw, Australia really fight back against a very difficult epidemic in Melbourne and Victoria. The people of Victoria sacrificed 101 days, I think, in virtual lockdown with ramping up of surveillance, and they've turned the corner there significantly. So from that perspective, I think what we can see between countries is that capacity both to chase the virus, take the fight to the virus, protect vulnerable groups, keep the health system ticking over, and when you get to that low level, following through with very aggressive measures when cases and clusters occur.
British Health Secretary Matt Hancock announces that Britain has secured 5 million doses of a Moderna vaccine for COVID-19, whose results are encouraging with a reported 94.5% effectiveness suggested in their preliminary trial data. The earliest doses are expected for delivery in the spring. Watch this.
Finally, you will no doubt have seen the excellent news that Moderna have today announced results from their preliminary trial data, suggesting that their vaccine has an effectiveness of 94.5%. This is another encouraging step forward. Although I stress that this is preliminary, the safety data is limited, and their production facilities are not yet at scale. Should this latest vaccine be approved, the doses would be available from spring next year. And I can announce that we have today secured an initial agreement for 5 million doses of the Moderna vaccine.
Meanwhile, clinical trials of a new potential coronavirus vaccine developed by Janssen, part of Johnson & Johnson, are set to begin in the UK with 6,000 volunteers from across the country taking part. The Scottish government could place Glasgow and parts of the West Scotland under the toughest restrictions in an effort to lower the stable but stubbornly high prevalence of the virus. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said a final decision will be announced on Tuesday. If placed under the highest level of restrictions, these areas could have to close hospitality, non-essential shops and gyms, as well as a ban on all contact between households. We still have updates for you. Please don't go away.
Sa panahon na laganap ang mga sakit, katuwang nyo ang BMEG Premium at Protect Plus Gold. Gawa sa state-of-the-art facilities ang BMEG Premium Feeds. Kaya ito ay safe, sanitized, and hygienic. Walang dalang sakit, certified, malinis, sariwa at sigurado. At para malinis ang paligid, gumamit ng Protect Plus Gold. Isang safe broad-spectrum disinfectant na pumapatay ng mga virus, bacteria at fungi. BMEG Premium at Protect Plus Gold. Sama-sama sa laban, walang iwanan.
This portion is brought to you by RJK Services Manpower Agency Corporation.
Fighting in Ethiopia has escalated again. Various reports said that the Ethiopian military bombed the capital of the Tigray region after Tigray fired rockets into neighboring Eritrea, which is an ally of Ethiopia. The United Nations said Tuesday that thousands of people were fleeing Ethiopia's conflict-torn northern Tigray region, and the border area with Sudan now faced a profound humanitarian emergency. Take a look.
According to Ethiopia, our humanitarian colleagues tell us that they are alarmed by the escalating conflict in the north. There have been reports of rocket attacks as the Amhara region as well as in Eritrea. There's also a reported airstrike in the vicinity of Mekele, the main city in Tigray region. Our humanitarian colleagues repeat their call to all parties to the conflict to de-escalate to avoid further casualties and the suffering of civilians. According to unconfirmed reports, there's a massive internal displacement from western to northern Tigray. More than 25,000 Ethiopians have crossed into Sudan so far. And we are also equally alarmed by the increasing insecurity in western and southern Oromia province, as well as in eastern Benishangul and Gumuz regions. The protection of civilians and the adherence to international humanitarian law must be enforced as a priority by all parties. In addition, we call for humanitarian access, the resumption of telecommunications, and basic supplies, including food, medicine, and fuel for citizens in the Tigray region.
In 2 weeks of fighting, hundreds of people have died and more than 25,000 Ethiopians have fled into Sudan. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed announced on November 4 he had ordered military operations in Tigray in a dramatic escalation of a long-running feud with the region's ruling party, the Tigray People's Liberation Front.
Thai royalist supporters known as Yellow Shirts gather at the parliament in Bangkok to protest against a new constitution, a primary demand of the massive student-led demonstrations in recent months. The motion is being debated in a two-day parliamentary sessions running from November 17 to 18, with the anti-government protesters vowing to lay siege and camp outside the parliament until their demand is met. Watch this.
เพราะฉะนั้นรัฐธรรมนูญฉบับนี้คนถึงออกไปรับร่างนะคะเพราะว่ามันป้องกันกระบวนการทุจริตขอบคุณพี่น้องประชาชนนะครับที่มายื่นหนังสือแสดงความเห็นว่าขอคัดค้านการแก้ไขการยกร่างรัฐธรรมนูญใหม่นะครับ
ผมก็จะนำข้อความนี้ไปบอกกล่าวต่อท่านประธานวุฒิสภา
Lawmakers are due to discuss several proposals for the way in which the Constitution can be amended, some of which would exclude the possibility of changes to the way King Maha Vajiralongkorn's monarchy is treated under the Constitution. There's also discussion of the role of the Senate, which was entirely selected by Mr. Prayut's former junta and helped ensure that he kept power with a parliamentary majority after a disputed election last year. The youth-led movement's direct challenge to the monarchy is unprecedented in Thailand, where King Maha Vajiralongkorn sits at the apex of power, supported by a coup-happy military and its billionaire clans. Among the students' demands are the abolition of a royal defamation law which shields the monarch from criticism, a clear accounting of the palace's finances, and for the king to stay out of Thailand's turbulent politics.
Now, later in the day, Thai police fired water cannon and tear gas on pro-democracy protesters attempting to get close to the parliament, where lawmakers were debating possible changes to the military scripted constitution. Take a look. Now, some tried to protect themselves from the streams of water with large inflatable yellow ducks. Thailand has seen months of student-led demonstrations demanding reform to the constitution and monarchy and for the current prime minister to quit. Several thousand took to the streets around the parliament building, where riot police had blocked off roads with concrete and barbed wire. As the parliamentary session continues, some opposition members emerged to talk with police in an attempt to defuse the situation. Senators and others wishing to leave were evacuated through the back door to appear on the Chao Phraya River and departed by boat.
In other news, a senior Chinese official on Tuesday backed calls to reform Hong Kong's judiciary in a landmark speech, signaling Beijing's determination to assert more control over the city's independent legal system. Even in Western countries, judicial systems have to catch up with the times and reform constantly. Zhang Xiaoming, deputy head of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, said in a speech marking the 30th anniversary of Hong Kong's mini constitution. He insisted that this does not affect judicial independence. Zhang did not give any specifics on what path such reform should take, but he did name-check Henry Litton, a retired senior judge who has written multiple columns in recent months critical of Hong Kong's judiciary. Litton, who served on Hong Kong's Court of Final Appeal from 1997 to 2015, has been celebrated by Beijing state media as a voice calling for an overhaul of the city's judicial system. He was highly critical of a ruling during last year's protests when senior judges struck down an order banning face masks as well as other judicial reviews by democracy supporters.
Now, Hurricane Iota was barreling towards Honduras on Tuesday. Weakened in strength, but still threatening to deliver more drenching rains and fierce winds to areas devastated by a powerful storm just 2 weeks ago. Authorities rushed to evacuate thousands of people from coastal areas of Nicaragua and Honduras in the immediate path of the storm. The weather system has already left one person dead after sweeping the Colombian Caribbean island territory of Providencia, where it caused widespread damage. U.S. forecasters at the National Hurricane Center warned of life-threatening storm surge, catastrophic winds, flash flooding, and landslides in Central America. Iota had reached Category 5 status, the highest level on the Saffir-Simpson wind scale, when it made landfall in Nicaragua on Monday. The National Hurricane Center said hurricanes of that force destroy homes, wreck power supplies, and most of the affected area is uninhabitable for weeks or months. The NHC forecasts Iota to weaken rapidly as it moves further inland and to dissipate over Central America by Wednesday. The Atlantic has seen a record storm season this year with 30 named storms and 13 hurricanes. Scientists say warmer seas caused by climate change are making hurricanes stronger for longer after landfall.
Now, here in the Philippines, the death toll for Typhoon Ulysses, which cut a massive swathe of destruction across Luzon, has now climbed to 73 persons, the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council said on Tuesday. The latest update the agency released this afternoon shows that the deaths were reported in Regions 2 or Cagayan Valley, 4A, Calabarzon, Region 5 for Bicol, and Cordillera Administrative Region. The number of injured is placed at 24 and missing at 19. Families affected were placed at 727,738, which is equivalent to 3,052,049 individuals residing in 5,594 barangays in Region 1 or the Ilocos area, 2, 3, 4A, 4B, Region 5, National Capital Region, and CAR. Some 70,784 families or 283,656 persons are being served inside 2,205 evacuation centers, while 41,203 families or 158,926 individuals are being aided outside. Damage to agriculture was placed at 2.7 billion pesos in Regions 1, 2, 3, 4A, 5, CAR, and the NCR, while infrastructure damage was estimated at 5.2 billion pesos.
In other news, Peru's Congress chose a 76-year-old former World Bank official as the South American country's new president, the third in a roller coaster week of political upheaval. Francisco Sagasti was elected as lawmakers met to try to move on from a crippling political crisis sparked by the impeachment of a popular president and the resignation of his controversial successor amid protests that killed 2 people. Sagasti from the centrist Morado Party will serve as interim president until the end of July next year, completing the mandate of Martin Vizcarra, whose impeachment by Congress last Monday set off a snowballing crisis. Some lawmakers questioned the wisdom of removing Vizcarra in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic and a crippling recession. The pandemic has hit Peru hard, with the politically fragile country having the world's highest per capita death rate with nearly 35,000 fatalities and GDP plunging more than 30% in the second quarter. Sagasti's predecessor, former Congress Speaker Manuel Merino, was forced to resign on Sunday after days of street protests culminated the day before in the death of 2 people. As Speaker of Congress, he was next in line as the post of Vice President was vacant.
German police on Tuesday arrested 3 suspects and raided properties over a spectacular heist a year ago in which more than a dozen diamond-encrusted items were snatched from a state museum in Dresden. Investigators were searching 18 properties in Berlin, including 10 apartments, as well as garages and vehicles, in connection with what local media had dubbed one of the biggest art heists in history. The main target of the probe was the so-called Remo clan, a family of Arab origin, notorious for ties to organized crime, whose members were in February convicted in another high-profile museum break-in in central Berlin. Prosecutors did not name the 3 detained, but said they are German citizens. They added, however, that they were hunting another 2 suspects of the Remo family, Abdul Mahed Remo and Mohamed Remo, both 21 years old, over the Dresden heist. All 5 are accused of serious gang robbery and 2 counts of arson, said Dresden prosecutors.
And this just in, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said he will work with Pacific Island and ASEAN nations to ensure vaccines can be delivered across all of those countries next year. As he speaks in Tokyo after signing a joint declaration with his Japanese counterpart, Prime Minister Suga Yoshihide, Morrison is the first foreign leader to pay an official visit to Japan since Suga took office in September. Take a look.
The Pacific Island states of the Southwest Pacific, or the ASEAN nations, where we will work together, as we are with many others, in ensuring that the vaccines that can be delivered across all of these countries, hopefully over the course of 2021, to return the world to a greater state of normal than we have known now for some time.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga said that Japan and Australia have reached a broad agreement on their bilateral defense pact to facilitate more joint operations and exercises on each other's soil. The pact is called the Reciprocal Access Agreement. It is a legal framework to allow their troops to visit each other's countries and conduct training and joint operations. The Defense Pact would act as a bulwark against China's growing military power in the region. The summit also comes amid deteriorating relations between Canberra and Beijing, with China imposing import bans on a range of Australian goods in recent months. And we'll take a short break. Eagle News will be right back.
This portion is brought to you.
Gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach visits the Olympic Village in Tokyo and says coronavirus vaccinations will not be mandatory for athletes at next year's pandemic-postponed Tokyo 2020 Games, adding that requiring shots would be going too far. Bach, who heads the international or the IOC, is in Tokyo on a trip to bolster confidence that the event will happen next year despite spiraling infections and new lockdowns worldwide. Let's listen in.
No, this will be no requirement, but we will encourage athletes that whenever possible that they have a vaccination because it's better for their health, but it's also a demonstration of solidarity with their fellow athletes and with the Japanese people. So therefore, I hope that by then a vaccine will be available and that as many as possible athletes will then accept the vaccination and will have one.
Bach and Japanese organizers have sounded a confident note that the event will go ahead, buoyed by recent positive vaccine trials and successful international gymnastics event in Tokyo this month. Bach said the organizing committee will take all the necessary precautionary measures so that athletes can relax and feel safe. On Monday, he said the IOC would look to help athletes secure shots if they are available and approved.
And finally, in our news, 4 astronauts carried into orbit by a SpaceX Crew Dragon boarded the International Space Station, the first of what NASA hopes will be many routine missions ending U.S. reliance on Russian rockets. Take a look. The resilient spacecraft docked autonomously with the space station some 260 miles above the midwestern U.S. state of Ohio at 11:01 p.m. on Monday, completing a 27.5-hour journey. The crew's 3 Americans, Michael Hopkins, Victor Glover, and Shannon Walker, along with Japan's Soichi Noguchi, each floated in zero gravity through a hatch and onto the ISS, where they were cheered and embraced by the station's 3 crew members.
Tell you how it was an amazing ride. I can't tell you how excited we were when that rocket lifted off the pad, and then the last 27 hours has gone really smooth, actually. And so we are so excited to be here. We are humbled, and we are excited to be a part of this great expedition. And so we are looking forward to the next 6 months and can't wait to get started.
And we are very humble and happy to be here. This is the first operational flight of the Crew Dragon, and I take 27 hours, but we enjoy every moment. And from now on, we are part of this great expedition crew member, Expedition 64. We have a lot of utilization ahead of us, and we are ready to work. Wakao-san, we hear you loud and clear. This is International Space Station.
The crew blasted off Sunday from Cape Canaveral, Florida. It is the first time that a private spacecraft is carried on a full-scale human ferry flight for NASA. Earlier, Mission Commander Hopkins gave pilot Glover his gold pin, a NASA tradition when an astronaut first crosses the 100-kilometer Kármán line marking the official boundary of space. Now, Glover is the first black astronaut to make an extended stay at the ISS, while Noguchi is the first non-American to fly to orbit on a private spaceship. The crew joins 2 Russians and 1 American aboard the station and will stay there for 6 months.
Ready to increase the space station science and get to work.
So exciting to see them there.
I know. Well, different nationalities, when you bring them together and they have that much fun, it's always a good thing.
Yes.
Well, that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. We hope to see you again tomorrow.
And at the end of the day, as I always say, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.
This program